power, death. This ain't just another street tale. This is the rise and ruthless fall of Harlem's own Sugar Hill Tone, a man who came up from the blocks, turned his name into legend, feared, respected, and envied, and built an empire so heavy it looked untouchable. But who was Sugar Hill Tone really? How did a hustler from Harlem climb high enough to pocket 7 figures a day? What made his name echo louder than the crime bosses who ran the game before him? And more importantly, what kind of storm had to hit for it all to come crashing down? Join us as we step into the world of Sugar Hill Tone and take a closer look at the story that isn't just about coke or cash. It's about betrayal, ambition, and a violent end that shook Harlem to its core. Up in northern Manhattan, there's a rise that looks down over the Harlem Valley. On that rise sits Sugar Hill, a neighborhood with a name that told you everything: the sweet life. Back in the early 1900s, Sugar Hill was more than just blocks of row houses and apartments. It was the spot where black excellence was on display. Doctors, lawyers, writers, and thinkers lived there, flexing in brownstones that had a clear view over Harlem from Coogan's Bluff. This wasn't just any hood. This was the top shelf of Harlem. During the Harlem Renaissance, Sugar Hill became the place where culture and hustle met. Jazz legends like Cab Calloway walked these same streets. Even future leaders like Thurgood Marshall called it home. People called it the sweet life for a reason. It wasn't about flashy cars or chains back then. It was about power, respect, and showing the world that Harlem had its own kings and queens. But when a block shines that bright, you know the shadows come creeping too. By the time Harlem's bright lights started to fade, the cracks in Sugar Hill were showing. The 1950s and 60s brought redlining and neglect, leaving the neighborhood starved of opportunity. Jobs were disappearing, families were struggling, and heroin had already started to eat away at the blocks. By the 1980s, crack cocaine came in like a storm, and the same brownstones that once held jazz parties turned into trap spots. The sound of Duke Ellington was gone, replaced by the clink of vials and the whispers of corner boys making their daily bread. Fast money was now the new sweet life, and Sugar Hill became a crown jewel of the hustle. It still had the look of elegance, but in time, the same streets that once held the Harlem Renaissance would become a stage for another kind of empire. One built not on art or law, but on the grind of the drug game. It was in this chaos that Raymond Resto, the man who would become Sugar Hill Tone, carved out his throne. Resto's story didn't start with millions in the street game. He was born in the Bronx and raised in Manhattan, and the streets gave him his nickname. Everybody called him Sugar Hill because that was the block tied to his roots, but behind the name was a kid carrying scars. His parents split early because his father was abusive, and Tone only saw his dad once before he was murdered in 1985. Tone was just 11 when that happened, and from then on, it was his mother and grandmother holding the family together. His mom worked 2 jobs, but the bills still piled up. Rent came late, food ran out, clothes were old, sneakers had holes. Around him, the neighborhood was flooded with crime, dope fiends, and hustlers running prostitution and gambling. Tone grew up with the survival stamped into his DNA. Even with all that weight, Tone found a way to shine on the court. Basketball became his escape, and he wasn't just playing for himself. He looked out for his siblings, teaching them, protecting them. At 13, he earned a scholarship to Lael Academy, an elite school full of rich kids. But walking into that world only made him more self-conscious. He felt the sting of poverty harder when surrounded by money. By 14, he was smoking weed every day. By 15, drinking heavy. The ball stopped bouncing. School didn't matter anymore. He dropped out in his sophomore year and turned full-time to the hustle. By 16, he was already in the system. His first arrest was for robbery, and in 1992 he pleaded to attempted robbery and got 5 years probation. But probation didn't slow him down. He was already knee-deep in the game, moving with a crew that carried serious weight. His circle included Dave Keiko, Green Eyes, Gordo, and Chubbs. Chubbs' squad wasn't small-timers. They were pushing around 15 keys of coke every week out of Washington Heights, along with heroin. They had security, runners, delivery crews, the whole structure. Tone wasn't just another body in that mix. His name was ringing in Harlem and Uptown, and the streets took notice. Then came the corner that made him king. Tone inherited 141st and Broadway, a spot that wasn't won in a bloody takeover, but passed down like a family crown. In Harlem, corners were legacies, and this one was gold. Reports said Tone's spot pulled in about $1.5 million a day, outshining even the famous Hamilton Place corner that made $1 million daily. It sounds wild, almost like a myth. But in the drug game, that kind of money is real if you own the streets like Tone did. He wasn't hustling small. His setup wasn't one block, one corner, or one crew. Tone ran things like a business empire. Every runner, every spot, every deal added up. And when it stacked heavy. That's why people compared him to Fortune 500 companies. The streets were his boardroom, and the profits were insane. From 141st to 145th, his strip turned into a fortress of money and dope. a cocaine hub that could rival Washington Heights. Cats in Harlem swore Tone was moving products so heavy the mob couldn't keep up. He was untouchable, a name that carried weight in every hood conversation. The line that Tone outsold the Italians is more than bragging rights. For decades, New York's organized crime meant the Mafia. The Italians ran the show. Families like the Gambinos and the Genoveses controlled the drug flow. They had the ports, the supply chains, the taxes on dealers. If you wanted to move dope in their areas, you had to pay them. They treated the drug game like their private monopoly, but Tone's success broke that grip, and the money proved it. By the time Tone was rising, the Italians weren't what they used to be. Law enforcement hit them hard. RICO cases, mass arrests, and betrayals broke their old machine apart. Their iron grip on New York started slipping. That's when new players like Tone stepped in. He didn't care about their rules or traditions. He saw the gap and took it. No hierarchy, no old school meetings, no waiting for permission. Tone played fast, built loyalty, and paid people in cash. The Mafia's old way looked slow compared to how Tone ran his operation. Tone's style was different. The Italians liked control. They decided who could sell, where, and for how much. Tone flipped that on its head. He flooded the market. Cheap supply, quick turnaround, non-stop movement. His product hit the streets fast and it hit hard. He didn't play gatekeeper. He made sure everybody working under him ate, but in return they stayed loyal. That's how he moved weight at levels nobody expected. Tone wasn't the first to challenge Italian power. Harlem always had its own kings and queens. Back in the early 90s, there was Queenie St. Clair running the numbers game. Then came Bumpy Johnson, who cut deals with the Mafia but never let them own Harlem. These figures showed that Harlem wasn't for the taking. Tone was a modern echo of that. The Italians had been checked before, and now it was his turn to make the streets answer to Harlem, not outsiders. The difference was the time period. Back in Bumpy's era, it was gambling, protection rackets, liquor. By Tone's time, it was cocaine and heroin. The scale was bigger, the profits crazier, and the technology sharper. Burners, trackers, coded moves. Tone wasn't tied to the old rules. He used whatever tool got the job done. His hustle wasn't just muscle. It was smart, fast, and ruthless. That evolution made him dangerous. He represented the next generation of Harlem's power players. The fight wasn't only about business, it was about respect. Outselling the Italians wasn't just a money thing. It was Tone sending a message. The same Mafia that used to tax black dealers and run Harlem's corners now had to watch someone from Harlem flip the script. Harlem was no longer playing second to anybody, and that made his name echo even louder. But there was a difference between Tone and the Mafia. The Italians played the shadows. Their bosses stayed hidden. Tone, he was loud with his success. His empire wasn't quiet. It was in your face. The cars, the houses, the network everyone knew about. His money and his reach couldn't be ignored, and that's where the danger came in. The Mafia had secrecy. Tone had exposure. He didn't hide his empire. And in the streets, when everybody knows your business, that business becomes harder to protect. He wasn't just a player anymore. He was the prize, and prizes get hunted. Tone climbed higher than most, and his crown shined too bright. The Italians had their blueprint, but Tone rewrote it in his own way. But Tone's life wasn't only about bricks and bankrolls. His empire was shining, but the hustle always came with blood in the water. Power brought respect, but it also brought betrayals, setups, and beef that couldn't be solved with words. By the late 90s, the game around Tone's circle started getting darker, and the crew he rolled with wasn't afraid to handle problems the hard way. In 1997, one of the first major hits tied to Chubbs' organization shook the streets. Kevin Davis, a courier, got caught up in some shady business down in Virginia. He was suspected of robbing the crew, and in the dope game, being suspected was already a death sentence. Davis was lured back to New York, thinking he was safe, but the trap was set. Under the Whitestone Bridge, he was shot dead. To cover their tracks, an alibi was lined up with a concert ticket, making it look like the shooter was somewhere else while the body dropped. The streets whispered about it, but nobody talked loud. Not long after, another setup played out, this time with a man named Frank. He had tried to hustle the crew by selling fake cocaine. That was disrespect you didn't survive easy. Frank was brought to an apartment, tied up and threatened until he claimed the money was in a safe. When the safe was cracked, it turned out empty. That move sealed his fate. Frank got desperate, grabbed for a knife, and in the chaos he was shot. Unlike Davis, he lived, but the message was loud and clear. The crew wasn't playing. Fake product and disrespect could get you buried quick. Tone's name was becoming legendary, but stories like these showed how deadly the game was. Harlem corners were making millions, but in the background, bullets and bodies were stacking up, and Tone was moving right in the middle of that storm, with his own legend still growing. Despite the heat, he played both sides of the line, the feared Kingpin and the admired neighbor. He put money back into the hood, sponsored youth leagues, even coached teams. Kids looked at him like a legend, not a dealer. He'd pull up to the Rucker games in a BMW 850, his presence stamped into Harlem culture. For some, he was the man to fear. For others, he was the man to thank. Either way, his legend was locked in the streets, and his rise was only beginning. By 1999, the walls around Tone were closing in, and one cop was right at the center of it. A Manhattan North narcotics officer from the notorious Dirty 30 precinct started hanging close to Tone's world. He wasn't just watching from the sidelines, he got close to Tone's family. His mother, Diane, would often cook meals, and his younger sister played in their store, which doubled as the headquarters for Tone and his brothers. Yeah, his brothers were getting money too, running operations that made Tone's corner the envy of Harlem's underworld. On the surface, it looked like friendship, but in Harlem, trust could be a setup. The Dirty 30 had already earned a name for being one of the most corrupt crews in NYPD history. Back in the early 90s, these cops were extorting hustlers, planting drugs, robbing dealers, and flipping the game for themselves. Harlem locals called the 30th precinct the cocaine capital of the world, and not just because of the dealers on the corners. Even the ones with badges were dirty. Tone himself was rarely touched by cops. He kept distance, stayed inaccessible, but his workers weren't so lucky. And when the block was crawling with heat like that, there was no way the game was going to stay fair. By the late 90s, the Dominican cartels were rising heavy. They had already pushed Cuban dealers out to Jersey, and now were eyeing Harlem. To solidify control over Sugar Hill, they set their sights on Tone, his brothers, and the Puerto Rican crews. Their strategy was simple: remove the Puerto Ricans, and the rest of the network would collapse. Power was shifting fast, and Tone's empire was right in the crosshairs. That's when the setup came. The officer who had grown close to the family was suddenly transferred out of the precinct. Before leaving, he was shown the planted evidence, a small bag of cocaine, just enough to trigger a federal case. The plan was in motion, and all he could do was watch it unfold like clockwork. Tone was arrested on federal drug charges, dragged from Harlem's throne to a jail cell. From Kingpin to being boxed in by both rivals and crooked cops, his downfall had begun. By February 3, 2000, the hammer dropped in court. Tone pleaded guilty and caught a brutal sentence, 135 months. That's over 11 years, plus 5 years of supervised release. But that wasn't the end of it. While the drug case was pending, he was also indicted for using firearms in a violent crime tied to that kidnapping situation we talked about earlier. That added another 60 months, consecutive, no breaks. Rumors swirled that Tone had some of the Dirty 30 cops on his payroll, but even that wasn't enough to keep him free. The gavel hit, and Harlem's Kingpin was officially caged. Locked up, Tone watched the streets change. The Dominicans didn't just step in, they took over. Their 6 cartels consolidated into 4, running Upper Manhattan with efficiency. Blacks and Puerto Ricans were pushed to the sidelines, reduced to moving heroin, while the Dominicans dominated the coke game. They ran it like businessmen, with more stability than the Italians who once controlled similar empires. The block that once screamed Tone's name now belonged to somebody else. Behind bars, Tone tried to keep his head up. He earned his GED, General Educational Development, stacked up educational programs, even became a fitness trainer for other inmates. But prison life cut both ways. He was sanctioned for multiple disciplinary violations, thrown into the SHU, Special Housing Unit, for long stretches. Alone in isolation, his mind broke heavy. He admitted later that suicidal thoughts haunted him in those times, proof that even a man who once pulled in $1.5 million a day could be crushed when the steel doors closed. In June 2013, after more than a decade, Tone finally walked free. He completed a 6-month drug treatment program at Daytop Village, but the taste of freedom came with problems. Later that same year and into 2014, probation officers accused him of violating his supervised release. The charges? Assaulting his girlfriend and trying to bribe a federal employee. When asked to take a urine test, Tone pulled out his wallet and told the technician he only had $200. He even asked if there were cameras in the room, hinting at a payoff. That move backfired hard. His release was revoked, and he was sentenced to another 48 months. On August 4, 2017, Tone was back out again. A new term of supervised release started, and for about 14 months, he looked like he was walking the straight path. He held down a job at FEG Capital, doing clerical and maintenance work, handling customers, and earning checks the legit way. By late 2018, he had stepped up as a restaurant general manager. What spot exactly? Nobody can say for sure. But one thing was certain: he was moving in circles that brushed against power. He was seen spending time around Roc Nation, rubbing shoulders with big names like Jay-Z, OG Juan, and Gordo. From the outside, it looked like Tone had traded the corner for connections, stepping into a new life. But Harlem knew better. No matter how clean the suit or how shiny the restaurant, the streets never stopped calling. Tone stayed tied to figures from the life, and deep down, everyone knew. His story with the game wasn't finished yet. What Tone didn't know was that a storm was already building around him. And in those years, the feds were running an investigation that would put him right back under the light. The DEA had already locked eyes on the Bronx. From 2016 into 2017, they were tracking a fentanyl-laced heroin ring run by Adalberto Velasquez. This wasn't small weight. Heroin and fentanyl were being brought in from Honduras, moved through Mexico, dropped off in Los Angeles, and trucked across the country to New York. Tractor trailers that looked legit, carrying regular cargo, were actually hiding millions in poison. The scheme was deep, international, and feeding the Bronx with a supply chain that felt endless. On February 2nd, 2017, the hammer came down. Law enforcement stood in front of the cameras, bragging about a haul of over 103 pounds of heroin and fentanyl seized. 32 people got indicted that day, hit with trafficking and conspiracy charges. DEA Special Agent James J. Hunt told the press, "Every day in New York City, 2 people fatally overdose from heroin and fentanyl." Today's drug traffickers moonlight as bathtub chemists, mixing heroin with compounds strong enough to kill an elephant. It wasn't just a bust, it was a warning shot, saying the game had shifted and the new hustle was deadlier than anything Harlem had seen before. Bronx District Attorney Darcel Clark called it a repugnant trade and said they were suing the defendants for $10.5 million to claw back some of the profits. The message was clear. This was bigger than street hustling. This was an epidemic, and anyone tied to it faced life in prison. That's where Tone's name surfaced again. Investigators linked him as a supplier, saying he was tied to around 6 kilos of heroin and 10 kilos of cocaine. To Harlem, it wasn't shocking. Tone had always moved heavy, and even after prison, he had the connections to plug in fast. But to the DEA, it was evidence he hadn't left the life at all. The operation, called Open Market, showed how wide the ring ran. From block corners in the Bronx to out-of-state buyers, even crews in Massachusetts were driving down monthly to drop $30,000 on heroin, flipping it back home for 4 times the price. Surveillance saw deals going down at places like Celia's Restaurant on Fordham Road, where cash and coke flowed under the disguise of a family business. By June 2016, the DEA had already seized 10 kilos of fentanyl and 12 kilos of heroin worth $14 million. By December, more seizures came. Another kilo here, another stash there, almost $1 million in cash ripped straight from the game. And through those wiretaps and truck interceptions, names kept coming up, including Tone's. The same man Harlem remembered as a kingpin was now being whispered about in the DEA's strike force rooms. The feds kept pushing. On January 28, 2017, they grabbed a tractor trailer with 10 kilos of heroin hidden in a wheel well. 2 days later, January 31st, they kicked in doors. Arrests, search warrants, cash grabs, guns pulled. Mercedes cars were seized, apartments raided. By the time the smoke cleared, the Bronx felt the weight of the bus. The charges were heavy: conspiracy, operating as a major trafficker, criminal sale, criminal possession. Some defendants faced life. Assistant district attorneys from the Gangs Bureau called it a network that stretched 5,200 miles. The NYPD commissioner said straight up, "These indictments should affirm to anyone engaging in the destruction of lives through heroin that no matter how sophisticated their operation might be, we will dismantle it." Tone wasn't yet the headline name, but the whispers were there, and for him, that was only the beginning. By 2019, his ties to Velasquez's ring were clear. February 27th of that year, the DEA dropped another bomb. This time, 9 members of the organization, including Raymond Tone Resto, were indicted for conspiring to distribute heroin, fentanyl, and cocaine out of Bronx auto body shops. The indictment named Tone right alongside Velasquez, Sal Castro, Joel Lopez, Willis Leras, Reynaldo Roman, Jaime Garcia, Antonio Burgos, and Marilyn Adino. The feds painted a picture of a network that looked like they were fixing cars, but were really supplying fixes of dope. From 2015 to early 2019, the DTO, Drug Trafficking Organization, had allegedly pumped hundreds of kilos through those shops, and much of it was laced with fentanyl, the same drug fueling record overdoses in New York. DEA Special Agent Raymond Donovan said, "These arrests will have a significant impact on the heroin and fentanyl supply in the Bronx." U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman added, "We have delivered a body shot to these drug peddling body shops." The language was tough, but the charges were tougher. Each defendant faced a mandatory minimum of 10 years, with the possibility of life in prison. Investigators said Tone himself was caught on surveillance, delivering cash. At one point, $122,000 was seized in connection with him. To the DEA, it was proof he was still in the money flow. To the streets, it was proof he never really left the hustle. The strike force called the case one of their biggest hits. Multiple agencies stood behind it: DEA, NYPD, state police, IRS, Homeland Security, even the U.S. Marshals. They wanted to send a clear message: no corner king, No supplier, no middleman was untouchable. But what shook people most was what happened after. Despite being hit with charges that carried life in prison, Tone wasn't buried in the system. By 2022, he was back out. His release sparked whispers in Harlem and the Bronx. People started asking the question nobody wanted to answer out loud. How did he walk free so quick? Snitching rumors swirled heavy, the kind of talk that could stain a man's reputation forever. In the hood, perception is everything. To some, Tone was still the legend. To others, his sudden release smelled foul, like deals had been cut behind closed doors. And once that seed of doubt was planted, it was only a matter of time before enemies tried to water it. For Tone, the DEA bust wasn't the end. It was just another chapter. But now with his freedom came more heat, more eyes on him, and more questions about loyalty, trust, and betrayal. Harlem had watched him rise, fall, and rise again. But in the streets, a comeback often comes with a price. And the next price waiting for Sugar Hill Tone would be the steepest one yet. Before we jump straight into that though, we gotta rewind. Go back to 2017. While Tone was still serving out his 48-month hit for bribery, another player was getting boxed up by the feds. His name was Ivan Collado. And Ivan was no small-time stick-up kid. He was a predator who thrived on violence. His crimes were straight-up robberies, armed and ruthless, the kind that left blood in the carpet and scars in the mind. Ivan's story started with a robbery in 2011. He and two others went after a man holding a kilo of heroin and several firearms. The job turned chaotic. Shots fired by the victim, bullets answered by Ivan's crew. It was the type of wild gunplay that could have left bodies on both sides. Somehow, Ivan walked out alive and richer. The streets already knew his name, and not in a good way, but he didn't stop. On September 30th, 2012, Ivan leveled up. This time, he and three others broke into a private home in the Bronx. They didn't come through the front door like regular thieves. They climbed in through a window. Inside, they tied one victim up and turned pure evil. To force the man to give up cash, they threatened to burn his genitals with a hot iron. That was the level of savagery Ivan played at. In the end, they only got about $2,500 and some belongings. But the terror they left behind was worth more than the cash. By 2013, Ivan was rolling steady in the robbery game. On March 2nd, he and 5 others forced their way into an apartment in the Bronx. Guns drawn, Ivan himself carried 2, waving one as he barked orders. They robbed the place, leaving with $7,000 in cash and other items. Again, the victims were left tied, scared, and scarred. Ivan didn't care. He was making a name out of fear, stacking paper through force. Only a few months later, May 24th, 2013, Ivan struck again, this time in Manhattan. He and 3 others stormed into another apartment, guns up, and went straight for the safe. Inside, they pulled about $2,000. Not the biggest score, but Ivan's pattern was clear. He lived by the gun, taking what wasn't his, breaking into homes like they were corner bodegas. By the time his cases stacked up, the system had no choice but to bury him. Ivan was sentenced to 121 months, over 10 years. He was supposed to rot behind bars. Yet, like Tone, Ivan came home in 2022. The timing was eerie. Harlem saw 2 dangerous men walking free the same year, men whose names had been carved into New York's underworld in different ways. Whether Tone and Ivan knew each other inside is unclear. Maybe they crossed paths, maybe they didn't, but when their lives finally collided, the outcome would be deadly. It all started on November 23, 2023, a cold night in Queens. Around 11:50 p.m., Ivan Collado made 2 911 calls. He told police there was a suspicious navy blue BMW X5 or X6 with a temporary plate parked near Burton Crescent. He even gave his real name and the callback number that ended in 1246. But while he was on the phone playing civilian, cameras caught a man with his bill stepping into that same BMW and moving it off camera. 2 nights later, November 25th, at exactly 11:36 p.m., a car tracker was activated for the first time. The registration name, Raymond Resto. The username, Sugar Hill. The unit number, 8882275019. They even bought it with a stolen credit card. That's straight disrespect, registering the device under the victim's own name. The phone tied to the account was the same one Collado used during the 911 calls. And that phone was subscribed to an email believed to be controlled by CC1, his co-conspirator. From the jump, the technology was ready to track Tone's every move. But at this stage, the device wasn't yet on his car. It was live, sending signals from wherever Collado carried it. The first signal from the tracker came from 140-74 Burton Crescent in Queens. At the same moment, 2 men, builds matching Collado and CC1, got into a dark crossover SUV and left the block. The tracker data lined up perfectly with the SUV's movement, meaning the device was in that car with them, riding along as they moved. Between 11:36 p.m. and 12:03 a.m., the tracker and the SUV traveled the same path. Then at 12:03 a.m. on November 26th, the SUV pulled back into Burton Crescent. Both men walked into the Collado home. By 12:15 a.m., the same two men came back out, this time climbing into a gray Nissan Rogue. The tracker's pings followed the Nissan too. This Nissan, registered to Collado, would play a central role in the moves that followed. At 1:03 a.m., November 26th, the Nissan rolled into the Bronx near Tone's home. Detectives later confirmed that the address belonged to him. For about 2 hours, the Nissan sat in the area, watching. This wasn't random driving. This was surveillance. They were clocking Tone's movements, learning when he stepped out, when the lights went off, when he left the block. Remember, at this point, the tracker still hadn't been planted on Tone's car. It was just being carried while they scouted his spot. At about 3 a.m., Tone and his wife came out of their home. They got into their Honda and drove toward an enclosed retail parking lot in the Bronx. The Nissan followed close behind. By 3:04 a.m., both cars reached the lot. The Honda pulled into the corner, while the Nissan hovered nearby. Then Tone and his wife left the Honda and dipped out in a car service. Around 4:04 a.m., the Nissan returned to the parking lot, this time with a dark BMW behind it, body style consistent with an X5 or X6. The BMW pulled up next to the Honda. The Nissan stayed just outside the lot, keeping watch. 1 to 2 minutes later, a man known as CC2 stepped out of the BMW, crouched by the Honda, and finally installed the tracker. This was the moment it got locked onto Tone's ride. After that, the device stayed put, stuck on the Honda, waiting for Tone's next move. The unit was set to ping once per minute. Every mile the Honda drove from then on went straight back to Collado's number or the CC1 email. That meant Tone's every move was now monitored in real time. Wherever he went, they knew. At 6:01 p.m. on November the 26th, Tony and his wife returned to the lot, picked up the Honda, and drove to a shopping center outside New York City. The tracker followed the same route. Later that night, around 11:45 p.m., they returned to the Bronx lot, parking the Honda back in the same corner. They got out, walking toward a cab that was waiting to take them home. 4 minutes later, at 11:49 p.m., the dark BMW pulled in front of them. 3 men jumped out, CC3, CC4, and CC5. 2 of them grabbed Tone, trying to drag him into the back seat. They wore dark clothes, gloves, faces hard to see. This was a straight snatch and grab, but Tone wasn't going easy. He fought hard, trying not to be shoved into that car. The struggle got violent. One of the kidnappers pulled a gun and started blasting. Tone tried to fight free, but the others pulled weapons too. Shots cracked across the garage, echoing off the concrete. Witnesses later said he was hit at least 4 times, 1 shot straight to the face. His wife, terrified, stood feet away as her husband collapsed. At 11:55 p.m., NYPD dispatchers got calls of shots fired at the Throgs Neck Shopping Center Target lot. Tone was rushed to Jacoby Medical Center, but pronounced dead soon after. By 11:53 p.m., the 3 kidnappers were back in the BMW, burning rubber out of the lot. A cab driver who had been waiting there tailed the BMW briefly. He caught something vital. The car had a temporary Georgia plate. That detail would later tie back to the BMW that Collado had tried to distance himself from during his fake 911 calls. By 12:30 a.m., November 27th, Collado himself was back on tape. Surveillance caught him parking the Nissan at Burton Crescent and walking off. 20 minutes later, at 12:50 a.m., he was dropped back off in another car and walked back into the Collado home like nothing had just gone down. Later that day, NYPD got consent to search Tone's Honda. They pulled the tracker off it, the unit number 8882275019, the same device registered under Raymond Resto with the username Sugar Hill. The evidence chain was undeniable. On November 27th, both the tracker account and the email tied to it were deactivated. They thought they were cleaning their tracks, but the data was already logged. On December 18th, 2023, NYPD seized that same Georgia-plated BMW in Queens. The one Collado had flagged himself in the 911 calls, the one the cab driver followed out of the Target lot after Tone was gunned down. From November 23rd to November 27th, the timeline shows a full plan in that fake call. That was the first move, a way to distance himself from a car he knew would be part of a bigger play. As one Harlem old head put it, they played chess while he thought it was checkers. The investigation following Sugar Hill Tone's brutal murder was as intense as his rise to power. On February 15th, 2024, the news hit heavy. Damian Williams, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, stepped up and made it clear. Ivan Collado, age 46, was being held responsible for the brutal setup that left Harlem's own Sugar Hill Tone dead in a Bronx Target parking lot. Williams told reporters, "We won't stop until justice is served." In that moment, it was clear. This case wasn't in the hands of the streets anymore. It belonged to the government. Collado was facing 2 serious counts and possibly the death penalty. As the court paperwork said, these are only accusations for now, but the weight of the charges is undeniable. Williams also took time to salute the team that built the case. This wasn't just a neighborhood investigation. This was federal muscle, moving with full force. As one cop put it bluntly, there's no place in society for this kind of barbarism. The case is now in the hands of the Violent and Organized Crime Unit. 3 prosecutors, Ashley Nicholas, Courtney Heavy, and Joseph Rosenberg, are leading the charge. With the evidence stacked and the charges this heavy, the courtroom battle ahead is set to be as cold as the streets that made it happen. On Thursday, February 6, 2025, the hammer dropped again. Federal prosecutors in Manhattan unsealed a superseding indictment, laying out a case that now stretched wider than anyone first thought. This wasn't just about one man, Ivan Collado, anymore. The net had widened, and 3 more names were now in it. Patricia Villalba, also known on the streets as Patty or Sweets, Horacio Collado, and a 4th man named Jerry Vargas, the one they called Peligro, meaning danger. 4 defendants, 1 deadly conspiracy, and the name that tied it all together, Sugar Hill Tone. The government made it clear these 4 weren't just bystanders. They were all part of what prosecutors called a sophisticated and brazen scheme to stalk, kidnap, and kill Raymond Resto. It was a hit born out of a drug debt, but the way it was carried out turned it into something bigger, cold-blooded murder right in front of his wife in the Bronx. As U.S. Attorney Danielle Sassoon put it, "We will not relent in our aggressive pursuit of justice." Those words weren't just aimed at the courtroom, they were aimed at the streets. But before we break down the charges, you gotta see how the debt game played out, because that's what lit the fuse. Between November 2023 and February 2024, Ivan Collado, his blood relative Horacio, and a woman named Patricia Villalba, known on the block as Patty or Sweets, were deep in the hustle. Powder cocaine was their play. They weren't out here pushing no dimes or petty 8 balls. Nah, they were flooding the city, moving weight across New York. They were flipping weight, kilos at a time, the kind of load that could turn a hustler into a boss overnight if he handled it right. But in the drug world, there are rules, and one of the oldest rules is consignment. That's when a crew fronts you the product, gives you the dope first on trust, and you're expected to sell it and pay them back after. The whole hustle runs on that trust. You mess up, you short the money, you don't pay, you just signed your own death warrant. That's how CC1, a local dealer in New York, got himself into the middle of this storm. Court papers never gave his real name. They just called him CC1. But in the underground, everybody knew this was a man who had been backed, protected, and pushed forward by one of Harlem's most infamous names, Sugar Hill Tone. Earlier on, CC1 got kilos on consignment from Ivan's crew. That meant he was running with big responsibility and even bigger risk. He was supposed to move the coke, flip it to his buyers, then come back with the cash to pay Ivan, Patty, and Horacio. Simple in theory, but deadly in practice. Because when CC1 fumbled the bag, it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone tied to him. We're talking kilograms of cocaine, tens of thousands of dollars per brick. Losing that type of bread in the underworld is more than sloppy. It's straight up disrespect. And disrespect doesn't slide, especially when you're dealing with wolves like the Collado crew. Now here's where it gets twisted. Sugar Hill Tone himself didn't owe a dime. He wasn't the one fronting the product, but CC1 was his guy. When you got Tone backing you, people think you're solid. But when CC1 came up short, that shadow cast right back on Tone. In Ivan's eyes, if you stand next to a man with a debt, you might as well hold the debt too. And if you're the bigger name, the one with the street rep, you become the face of that problem. That's exactly how Tone went from Harlem Kingpin to Mark Man. His connection to CC1 turned a business beef into a death sentence. There's a Harlem saying, sometimes it ain't about what you owe, it's about who you stand next to when the bill comes due. Once CC1 failed to pay, Ivan and his people didn't waste time. They pressed him heavy. Harassment, intimidation, and threats. They told him straight, if the cash didn't show up, blood would. But they weren't just looking for repayment, they wanted names. Who bought the coke? Who was connected? Who could be squeezed? They were trying to rip CC1's network apart, and Tone's name kept coming up. That made Tone's situation worse. He wasn't just guilty by association anymore. He was now seen as the muscle, the shield, the man keeping CC1 from folding under pressure. To Ivan and his crew, that meant Tone wasn't just an obstacle. He was the real target. By late November 2023, the Collado crew had already decided the talking was done. This wasn't idle threats anymore. Ivan, Horacio, Patty, and Jerry Vargas started hunting Tone. They weren't sloppy. They weren't rushing. This was a calculated, mapped-out play. They surveilled him, tracked his movements, and planted a GPS on his ride so they could shadow every turn of the wheel. And on November 26, 2023, it all exploded. That night in the Throg's Neck shopping center lot, Tone was ambushed, shot multiple times, including once in the face, and left to die. Cold-blooded murder in public view. You would think that killing Tone ended the beef, but not in this game. The drug debt didn't disappear with his blood on the pavement. If anything, Ivan's crew doubled down. Even after November 26th, once Tone was gone, the cocaine conspiracy kept rolling. Between late 2023 and into February 2024, the Collado crew circled back on CC1 and his family. The same harassment, the same intimidation, but now with the weight of a fresh murder behind it. The message was brutal and clear. Tone's death was only proof of what could happen to anyone else who stood in the way. From that point on, every knock at CC1's door carried fear. Every step outside, his family felt the shadow. Tone was gone, but the ghost of his name still haunted the whole play. By the time the feds stepped in, the list of charges read like a death sentence in itself. First up, narcotics conspiracy. This was the foundation. Ivan Collado, his bloodkin Aricio, Patricia Villalba, better known on the block as Patty or Sweets, were all named. The feds said they were knee-deep in the coke game, moving big weight across New York. This ain't about dime bags, this was kilos. And once you're moving kilos, the law treats you like a kingpin. If convicted, that charge alone carries life in prison, with a mandatory minimum of 10 years. Like the Harlem saying goes, once you touch the bricks, you're already carrying the risk. Next, it got darker. Cyberstalking resulting in death. This ain't about some petty online beef. This was using tech as a weapon. GPS trackers, digital accounts, fake names. The indictment says Ivan, Patty, Aricio, and Jerry Vargas, the one they called Peligro, worked together to stalk Sugar Hill Tone until he had nowhere left to hide. The penalty? Life in prison. Then came conspiracy to commit kidnapping resulting in death. This was the heart of the plan. The prosecutors painted it straight. They tried to snatch Tone, drag him into that BMW, and use him as leverage. But when he fought back, the bullets flew. For the law, even the attempt, even the plan, is enough to stack charges. The same for Ivan, Patty, Aricio, and Peligro got tied to this. The punishment? Again, life in prison. No wiggle room. The streets say, if you plan it, you own it. Now add the firepower. Firearms use, carrying, and possession. They weren't just rolling with straps. They used them in the middle of the crime. That's automatic federal heat. For this one, the law says life in prison is on the table, and there's a mandatory 10-year hit on top of anything else. That means even if somehow they beat other counts, this one stacks extra time. No parole, no breaks. As one cop bluntly put it, the gun always makes the sentence heavier. This is the most chilling one. Murder through the use of a firearm. The moment Tone got blasted, this charge locked in. Ivan, Patty, Aricio, and Vargas all named again. And this ain't just life in prison. This one carries the death penalty. The government rarely plays that card, but here it's sitting on the table. 4 people, 1 murder, and the law saying, you might not just rot in prison, you might not make it out alive. Here's another layer. Cyberstalking with use of a dangerous weapon. That brings another 10 years in prison. It might sound small next to life or death, but these charges pile like bricks. 10 here, 20 there. Suddenly you're never walking free again. Like one Harlem hustler once said, stack enough weight on a man, he ain't ever getting up. Then we get into the lies, false statements. Patricia Villalba got hit with 2 separate counts. The feds say she lied straight to investigators. That's 5 years per lie. Doesn't sound like much, but add it to the mountain she's already climbing, and it's just more years carved off her life. And in federal cases, lying isn't just dirty, it's dangerous. Because once the feds prove you lied, your credibility is dead forever in front of a jury. Finally, false statements again, but this one lands on Ivan himself. The man at the top caught lying to the feds. Another 5 years on the stack. It's almost petty compared to the murder charge, but it shows something deeper. Even when faced with the biggest case of his life, Ivan tried to finesse, tried to duck the truth. And that lie, no matter how small, became another nail in his coffin. When the U.S. attorney stepped to the mic, she didn't sugarcoat it. She called it callous violence and promised her office wouldn't back down until justice was served. DEA Special Agent Frank Tarantino drove the point home too. They chose to use violence and intimidation to further their criminal enterprise, he said, making it clear that in the dope game, blood is always the hidden cause. NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch vowed that law enforcement would never let that type of street brutality go unchecked. Behind the headlines, the grind was real. The DEA Task Force, NYPD, New York State Police, Bronx Homicide Squad, and even intelligence analysts from the New York, New Jersey high-intensity drug trafficking area all pulled strings. They pieced it together. Every breadcrumb pointed back to Ivan and his crew. For Ivan, Patty, Aricio, and Vargas, the law was now as heavy as the weight of the bullets that killed Sugar Hill Tone. There's a Harlem saying, in this game, you either pay your debts or you pay with your life. And that's the cold lesson. In this life, debts don't just belong to the man who signs for the product. They belong to anyone tied close enough to carry the heat when it blows back. Sugar Hill Tone didn't owe a dime himself, but his name, his backing, and his weight on the streets made him part of CC1's debt. Some say Tone's downfall was written in his success. When you're making big bucks, envy comes knocking. Rivals see you as a threat. The question that lingers is simple but heavy. Was Sugar Hill Tone's empire too strong to be stopped from the outside? Or was the real danger always sitting right next to him on the inside? Let us know what you think in the comments box below. And if you liked how we presented this video, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.